Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your hosts, Matt, Elizma and Steve. And today we're talking about a hormone called testosterone. And it's going to be broken up into two parts. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because the first part is about the owners of testes. Okay?
Testicles.
Yep, testicles.
External
Don't
genitalia.
laugh. External genitalia. I've got to be politically correct, because when we get in trouble for this.
Yeah, quickly, part two.
Part two is about people who own uteruses.
What? Oh, because I suppose... Wait, hang on.
They own a uterus.
I'm not helping you move your house. Oh, my you.
That's a clean joke.
I got rid of my Mazda. I got a little Honda van now. I don't have a uterus anymore.
No. But, well, if you don't have a uterus, part one's for you. I don't know how to say it without saying the two things that I've said for 51 years. But we are talking about testosterone today, and that's one thing we know.
Okay.
The other part's very grey, but there's two parts, we know that.
What are you laughing at now, Steve?
I'm trying to make this politically correct, this
You
podcast.
can't. Let me do it.
That takes too much concentration.
I will do it the Band-Aid style of politically correct.
Cover.
We will pretend we're in the 90s.
Okay, 90s,
Yeah, we're going back to the 90s. Today we're going to do a podcast on testosterone.
Good.
In relation to how it affects masculine... Fuck, I don't know how to say this anymore. Okay. Today's podcast is on testosterone.
That's right. That's it.
Part one.
Let's leave it at that.
Now
Part one.
Testosterone's good and bad. We know it's good in the right amounts, it's bad in the wrong amounts. We want some, we don't want too little. Now, the people that own testes want more testosterone because that's where the testes are made.
So let's just get on with the podcast.
Right.
Now, my goal for today's podcast is I want to kind of summarise these simple kind of concepts of how these hormones work. I want to see where they're made. I don't want to see where they're made. That was a bad thing. I want to understand where they're made, how they're made. I want to understand the processes going from the brain to the body, asking the body to make testosterone, and we'll talk about the different chemicals involved in that. But we talked about it earlier, how easy it is for a man to get a testosterone surge in exposure to a mating partner or something like that. Like it's easy to get a testosterone surge. It could be a picture, it could be a thought, it could be a breeze in the right direction for some people, and you'll get the testosterone surge. But then maintaining that testosterone levels in a healthy range so that we can achieve all the amazing things that come from testosterone, which we'll also talk about.
Yep.
And then also understanding that when the testosterone spikes and increases, it's got to go somewhere. So I want to understand where it goes, because we know testosterone converts to estrogen, or it can convert to another thing called dihydrotestosterone, or our body will just clear it away. So they're the processes we want to talk about today. And we're going to talk about a bit of a hierarchy, because I think it's really important for people to understand that you have to have a certain base foundation to launch from. With everything. I don't care what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get to your genetic potential or maximize anything, you've got to come from a really solid starting point. So adequate nutrition, good lifestyle, regulating stress, looking at toxin exposure. At the end of today's podcast, you're probably going to realize that stuff is a hell of a lot more important than looking for some magic bullet in the form of a herb or something, because if it's just sorting out that base foundation in 80% of the cases will get people into a healthy, normal range.
Exactly.
And then you can take it from there if you're an elite athlete or something.
Absolutely. So the basics of testosterone, like most hormones, it's made from cholesterol.
Yep.
Cholesterol is made in the liver, and the cholesterol it's made from is a type of cholesterol called low-density lipoprotein, or LDL cholesterol. And the
Which
liver,
is the good and bad.
Well,
there's a good, bad, and
that's the bad
classical one.
Yeah, that's the bad one. LDL's bad, and that's the one that makes testosterone, because that's the one that comes out from the liver and delivers it to the tissues.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Now, in the a lot of
and then when it gets to the tissues, like your nuts, it'll convert that cholesterol into testosterone.
Correct.
Another place. So for cholesterol, is that the one that goes to your skin and gets oxidized to make into vitamin D?
Yes, it does.
And that? Yeah, right. So this cholesterol is good. And how funny is it that as people age and their hormones and everything drop and their vitamin Ds and everything drop, their cholesterol seems to come up.
Yeah, now we know why, because the body's trying to make more of it.
Yeah.
So one of the great ways in the early 40s, when they started reducing cholesterol, the first thing they used was testosterone in aging men in the 40s. They gave them testosterone injections and their cholesterols plummeted.
Oh, because they didn't need the building block to make it.
Correct.
Gee, I would have thought almost negative feedback if you're putting a testosterone in you might have a backlog,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
it'll build up.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, because the body really is smarter than that and
Yeah.
goes, hey, we're making all this cholesterol in the liver,
Because that
LDL.
cholesterol is made in the liver.
Of course it is.
Yeah. And that's why when these people, this is a bit off topic, but that's why when these people cut all the fats and cholesterol out of their diet, their cholesterol goes up. Because their body goes, man, we
Makes
need
more.
to make some.
Yeah, and that's why triglycerides in the blood that turn into cholesterol are increased when you have a low-fat diet, like high carbohydrate
Yeah, wow.
diet. And that was the paradox that was misunderstood till the 90s.
So how does your cholesterol know whether it's going to become vitamin D or testosterone? So they're the chemicals coming from the brain, like luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone.
Yep,
so
that's
the
right.
process is, where does it start?
Which one?
Gonadotrophic releasing hormone or something?
Yeah, gonadotrophin releasing hormone,
So it
GnRH.
starts there. That's the brain saying you need more hormone. load.
That's the hypothalamus telling the pituitary, if we want to be
Yep.
specific.
And then the pituitary's going, right, I'm going to release luteinizing hormone, which is going to send a message to the body to make more testosterone.
Correct.
And so this is
And sperm.
now. This is where we've got to specify that we're specifically talking about people that have external genitals, regardless of what gender you choose to identify
That's
as.
right.
If you've got
That's
testicles
good.
hanging off the outside, and they work differently to the ovaries on the inside. And when luteinizing hormone affects a testicle, it makes testosterone.
Correct.
When follicle stimulating hormone affects the testicle, it makes sperm and testosterone. So
That's right.
follicle stimulating hormone in men will make testosterone.
That's right.
And the reason why I said it, because we're going to talk later in regards to this hormonal profile with women, and how that follicle stimulating hormone actually makes estrogen. And that's one of the really big important point. So this is important to understand that in men, follicle stimulating hormone, they make the fish, where in women, they're designed to make the egg.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've already got a bit of a problem looming here, and Elizabeth might want to elaborate on this. When a man or a woman gets older, their cholesterol levels typically go up, and then they typically go on the most common drug prescribed, which is a statin medication
Yeah.
that is designed to reduce LDL cholesterol. That's stopped the production. Now, just from a rough point of view, you've probably seen a few clients with that on statins, and their LDL levels are dropped. How do you think that affects the hormones?
Oh, well, it typically causes the hormones to tank, not just vitamin D, CoQ10. And CoQ10 is very important for keeping sperm healthy, and reducing oxidative stress and fertility. But, that's more in younger men, of course. But I mean, they're putting even like young people on statins these days. But it causes that testosterone to drop. So a lot of, men complain of libido issues and, testosterone is the vitality hormone.
How do you fix it? I mean, if someone's on those medications, can you bypass that? Because, I mean, if their cholesterol level's so low, you can't ask them to make more.
No. So you
That's
can't.
when they measure their testosterone. The doctor says, we'll give you an injection.
That's right. So that's generally like you have to go on medications and things like that.
There is a new medication for it, which is usually used for women, called clomiphene, which is a drug that stimulates LH and FSH in women to increase their ovulation.
Yep.
It's a SERM, and I know a lot of people talk about SERMs. This is the original medical SERM.
A lot of the guys, that take the enhanced athletes, they do a course of the anabolic steroids based on testosterone, and those will send a negative feedback and shut everything down. You've all heard about the shrinking nuts and all that sort of stuff. And then what they'll do, though, to get things back in, they'll often use pregnancy-style hormones.
Yep, that's
Pregnol, HCGs and that sort of stuff to increase luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and increase its sensitivity to get the nuts to come back and start making all the hormones. There's a lot of natural stuff that does a similar sort of thing on negative feedback.
Yeah, this drug here, I've got some figures here for you if you want testosterone increases. In men, they gave clomiphene, which is that drug that stimulates ovulation in women. A lot of women know about that if they want to fall pregnant. They gave them the same dose they gave women, and their testosterone went from the 200s to the 600s. That's American figures. So that's quite an impressive figure. And it also improves sperm concentration in hypogonadal men. So it's a good drug. It's a SERM. So it's a drug that is normally used for women that they're repurposing for men because, as you correctly point out, LH and FSH have different effects in men and women. And we know that from a herbal medicine point of view. We would give a herb that can increase LH and FSH, and they have different roles in men and women.
And in the clinic, so when in the clinic, when I saw high luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and low levels of hormones. And the things that I would use to improve sensitivity to the luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, there was things like melatonin that you could use as a supplement. But the first place you go, are you sleeping, and is it dark room and all that sort of stuff. So that's why sleep and that's so important, because that's when a lot of these receptors and reproductive pathways are kind of working. I used to also use Shilajit. That's where Shilajit worked really, really well to sensitize the body to luteinizing hormones, follicle stimulating hormone. And then there was, what was the other? Korean ginsengs and that sort of stuff as well. But what did you have any tricks for that?
No, pretty similar in terms of the LH and the FSH. I guess what I would also look at, in terms of markers is sex hormone binding globulins and things like that as well, because sex hormone binding globulin, it's kind of like the carrier protein for testosterone in the bloodstream. And when it's bound to sex hormone binding globulin, your body can't use it. And when the free testosterone is kind of like more bound to albumin, and that can be used by the body. So sometimes it's not a production problem. You're producing enough testosterone, but because it's bound up to something like sex hormone binding globulin, the body just can't use it. So then there's no point really in pushing and stimulating more testosterone production. You really want to look at unbinding and just freeing up the testosterone. So
and so stress again, and poor lifestyle, lack of sleep, inflammation, toxic exposure can all increase sex hormone binding globulin.
Yes.
It's basically saying that once we've had once we've had the testosterone release, we've got to metabolize it and convert it and change it to stop it from being active. But if they can quickly increase sex hormone binding globulin, they can reduce the amount of free testosterone available. Again, hope people are taking notes so far, because so far when you want to get your hormone levels measured, you should be looking at luteinizing hormone, LH, FSH, get our testosterone measured and our free testosterone, and also measure the sex hormone binding globulin, so you know if your testosterone levels are actually good, but it's all bound and inactive. Berberine jacks it right up too. There's a supplement. So there's berberine, Bohemia. There's quite a few supplements that have been used against like hormonal dependent problems and disorders, that they actually work by increasing sex hormone binding globulin and binding it all up. Berberine, a lot of men will take berberine because it's got a reputation for working like metformin for insulin sensitivity and working on the liver, but it can actually bind up their testosterone and reduce the amount of free testosterone, which is, and we'll talk about berberine again in the second part when we're talking about how useful that is in certain cases.
Very good. Now, sex hormone binding globulin, just so people know, is made in the liver. It increases your age. And the new blood test that the doctors are doing now, it's called an FAI, or a free androgen index, which is like a free testosterone, because it's only about 2% of your testosterone's free. So we want to increase that.
What other androgens do they test in that, though? Because testosterone's not our only androgen. We've got the androstenedione and DHEA. We've got the progesterone's an androgen. So they're all androgens
dihydrotestosterone.
Dihydro. And man, how hard is it to get someone to test dihydrotestosterone?
On blood tests, it's pretty hard.
I mean, it's intracellular, so it's pretty hard to do. It takes 3 weeks later, and they all pretend it doesn't exist.
So you can do it in urine. So urine testing, you can...
Okay. Yeah, I thought you said Europe. I think it's a long bloody way to go.
Where you can test like the 5-dihydrotestosterone, your DHEA, all of those kinds of, even things like 5-alpha reductase and 5-beta reductase activities and things like that.
That's excellent.
And looking at aromatization of testosterone, that's a big one.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yep. I see that quite a lot in males, sort of like around age 40, 50, if they have chronic health issues, that they aromatize, which is pretty much converting or turning all their testosterone into estrogen.
And so that can happen. That's really happens a lot in the prostate, and they can also happen a lot in fat tissue, but even breast tissue. So it's actually the rates of actual breast cancer in men is increasing. It's one of those bizarre things at the moment where we're starting to see a similar change, where people are getting mastectomies and that sort of stuff.
You talked about melatonin before. That's an anti-aromatizing substance. There's a lot of things that reduce aromatase. Zinc is another one. Now, you mentioned testing. I want to elaborate on that. The Dutch test is probably the test you're talking about with urine.
Yes.
Yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that and what that can test for? You mentioned a few things there. Is that a good one you recommend for people?
Very good one. It's a dry urine test, so it's not like you collect the urine in the bottle.
Painful.
Well,
Do you have to
no.
post
You
a
not
stone?
drink for like a
It's-
month?
No, it's peeing on a stick, and you just let it, like a pregnancy test, and you let it dry, and then
I've
you send
done
it
heaps
off
of
to the
those.
lab, right? So
I'm always negative.
yeah, pretty easy. But it tests for.
You seem always so happy and upbeat.
Yeah, I know. Always negative for pregnancy tests.
Okay. Moving on. So the stuff that you can measure on a Dutch test includes like a lot of, we talk about cholesterol, and then cholesterol converts to pregnenolone. Pregnenolone goes to DHEA. So it starts off with that DHEA. Then it measures the progesterone and the progesterone metabolites. Then the three estrogens, estrone, estradiol, and
Estriol.
that's
Yep.
right. They metabolize, so how you metabolize those estrogens. It measures, the testosterone, like I said, the 5-alpha, 5-beta reductase activity, androstenedione, and also, did I say the 5? Did I say
You said
dihydrotestosterone?
5 stuffs and things.
Yeah, you've
Lots of-
mentioned
lots
the
of things.
reductase enzymes.
Yeah.
The two of them. There's a third one discovered recently, which is interesting. And that's why the two drugs, durestide and finasteride, are for the hair and that sort of thing.
Oh,
if you've
right.
gone bald or something, and they knock out either 2 or 3 of those enzymes.
Yeah.
Which one? Well, the 5-alpha reductase, the different one in
The
the hair, is it?
5-alpha reductase, yeah. Because if you take your testosterone, you can be making testosterone in healthy amounts, but if you're converting that testosterone into the 5-dihydrotestosterone, then that's where you get the male pattern balding.
Yeah.
You can get
See, then, this is so... people need to understand, it's like a cascade of events. Like, when you try to manipulate it, you got to understand that you can't break any of these parts because it's all happening in a body. And that body is living in a world. And that world is a soup of toxins and weird, bizarre shit, as well as good stuff and nutrients and everything like that that support these things. So many people are out there just trying to jam it. They're reacting to blood tests, which are just pulses and that sort of stuff within the blood, hormones in transit. And no one's doing the full urine test along with the blood test to confirm it and are getting a good understanding of where we're at with the hormonal profile. And they're starting to dabble around with these different ingredients. If I have a look at some of those, we've mentioned a couple of herbal ingredients now, but if you have I mentioned how important it is to have that stable state to start with. And this is the same with a lot of hormones. Zinc is so bloody important because what we've mentioned so far, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, they're actually zinc dependent. If you've got no zinc, you can't make those chemicals that come from your brain telling your nuts to make hormones.
Yep.
Testosterone is zinc dependent.
Yes.
And so if you can't have zinc to get the chemicals to come out to make the hormone that needs zinc, the zinc deficiency will shut down the whole cascade.
Yep.
And if you have a zinc deficiency as well, you can't control the aromatase and the 5-alpha reductase. I mentioned before that one of the big problems with these converting enzymes, and I want to talk more about them in regards to just generic detox and just generic survival, because it makes so much sense when you take a step back and look at things, the big picture. So if you have a look at the fact that zinc is an essential nutrient for all of those steps, the other thing that zinc is famous for is detox and chelation of toxins.
Yeah.
Toxins.
I think it's
So-
involved in about 600 different reactions
so things
or more.
and things that are famous for creating hormonal dysfunction are specifically require zinc to chelate and remove. So I don't think it's a coincidence that certain chemical exposures such as cadmium would actually create a zinc deficiency and then could actually then result in a faster enzyme or be associated with a faster enzyme and increase risks of cancers and all that sort of stuff from these particular conversion pathways. So if you've got a zinc deficiency, you have to make sure you load that up first.
Yep.
Because what a lot of people are doing is they'll get their testosterone levels, for example, measured, or maybe not, just go subjectively on a symptom picture, or just assume more is better and I always want more.
Yeah.
And then they'll use something like D-aspartic acid is a very common one. I want to mention D-aspartic acid now because of what we've mentioned so far. The theory is with D-aspartic acid is it increases testosterone release. And the way it does that is by actually increasing luteinizing hormone release and also fueling up the Leydig cells to just make more testosterone. Because it's an irritant. It's an on switch. It's a nerve. It's like D-aspartic acid. It's like the D form of the aspartame basically makes it affect the nerves more and nerve
it's
signal
neural
conduction.
excitation,
Yeah, so it's an exciting nerve. So what happens is you irritate the bloody pituitary or whatever, and the luteinizing hormone and that comes out, and then you irritate the nuts and some testosterone comes out because that's what nuts do. but other parts of the body get exposed to the same chemical. D-aspartic acid, in all the studies, it shows that the testosterone is a smidgen of just a temporary little poof in a couple of days or a week where it increases, and then over the following weeks and months, it's all converted. What a D-aspartic acid does is it drives aromatase to increase estrogen, and it drives 5-alpha reductase to increase the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. And so what happens with D-aspartic acid, it irritates the shit out of the body, so it releases stuff. But then it also converts it through to everything else. So the net result of D-aspartic acid has no influence at all at increasing testosterone production in a healthy male. We've got so much data. And everyone, so I wanted to do this update because there's a whole heap more data getting published in the last couple of years on the couple of things we've discussed, such as D-aspartic acid. And we've also mentioned DIM a fair bit. I don't want to go into DIM now because we're going to talk about DIM when we're going to be talking about the detox and the cytochrome P450s and everything, and show how that one works. And the new research confirmed everything we suggested previously, as opposed to contradicting it like people may have thought. So what's really important to understand is get the base foundation right. We said that so much as toxic exposure, cadmium is one of the big ones, leads, all the heavy metals, they all have this influence possibly, and it's not coincidental that they're all involved in these zinc and selenium systems that are needed for all of these enzyme pathways.
And cadmium, what the biggest exposure, maybe not today, but biggest exposure was smoking. When that used to be very popular in the 70s and the 80s. And
It's in a lot. I had one guy come through with prostate cancer once, and he went and got his stuff tested, and he was really high in cadmium. And I said to him, that can come from burning of fossil fuels. Did you work in those sort of industries, where you get exposure to pollutants? He said, I know exactly where it comes from. He says, I used to sell pesticides to the peanut farmers. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you can't spray the peanuts. And he said, so they do lines of cadmium under the ground to actually protect the peanuts.
Oh my
and he
God.
says peanuts are full of cadmium. And I was just like, oh my God.
Peanuts are full of cadmium?
Knew that.
Yeah. We don't want our nuts full of cadmium because
that's our source of zinc and selenium as well.
That's right. And usually nuts are very high in zinc and selenium.
You mentioned toxins. Another one classic that downregulates testosterone is bisphenol A or plastics. This is a great paper. So it does that in the Leydig cells. So that's quite nasty too.
And does it increase estrogen as well? Because we knew there was a big link with BCA.
Absolutely, it
breast
does.
Cancers and
it
stuff.
increases CYP and 19A1, which is the aromatase.
Yeah, I wrote that down here.
Oh, good. There you go. There you go. I was just reading your mind.
While you mentioned cytochrome, I just wanted to quickly mention this because we're talking about it now. You brought it up. You said the cytochrome P450, 19A1, also known as aromatase.
Yep.
So what cytochrome P450s are is that's like our part of our survival response. They're designed to handle poisons and venoms and all sorts of toxins. And they're actually designed to make a toxin quickly converted into a more water-soluble form so we can purge, just froth at the mouth, vomit, diarrhea, get rid of the bloody stuff. So whenever you get a stress response, whenever you get an immune trigger, whenever you're overworked and overburdened, or if you get any toxic exposure, whatever cytochrome P450 is needed to convert that toxin, it'll be sped up.
Yeah.
So it's rarely a problem with cytochrome P450s going slow because they tend to speed up and upregulate when you need them. And they often stay fast until you slow the buggers back down. The things that slow the cytochrome P450s back down, typically they're things like antioxidants.
Yeah, or lack of cofactors. So it needs, iron is a big one, for instance. So iron.
I love that. I want to.
Yeah, so if you're iron deficient, which men generally are not, that's potentially something that can slow it down.
Yeah. With the cytochrome P450, it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular compound or a particular toxin. We can read all this sort of stuff and find one guy that worked with the peanuts, it was cadmium. Find another guy who was a truck driver. Another guy could just be stressed as fuck, or iron deficient, other way. Anyway, so what you'll find is the cytochrome P450 speed up, and it can stay sped up. Now, this is where the challenge comes in, because as your liver then tries to process normal chemicals, it actually uses those enzymes in the ratio that they're there. So if you've got a particular enzyme that's been sped up, it will actually drag more of those compounds through because it's just working faster. And this is where we start to get the problems with aromatase. So the testosterone is through aromatase converted to estrogen. The body's trying to detoxify that estrogen. the cytochrome P450s that are designed to detoxify the estrogens.
Yes, like CYP304.
Yeah, if cytochrome P450 304 is actually running faster because of toxic exposure from xenoestrogens, pesticides, BPAs,
drugs,
and all that sort of stuff, it actually takes your estrogen down a different pathway, making a form of estrogen, typically 16-alpha hydroxyestrone, where that one's really highly proliferative. It just makes shit grow.
Yeah.
I mean, estrogen is the best things for making things grow, and that one makes things grow more than anything. So that's the bad one.
Well, 4-hydroxy is also...
Well, that's ugly. I always do good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah.
So I always have the 16's the bad,
Yeah.
the 2 is the good, because once we get the 2-hydroxy pathway, we can actually add the methylation. So we can methylate it and make 2-methoxy, and then that one just sits there deactivated and can actually leave the body if your guts are functioning well.
Yep.
So we've got to talk about guts then, I suppose, as well. The 4 is the ugly one because 4 is the one that creates the reactive quinones that cause a lot of the breast cancers, leads a lot of glutathione.
Damages the DNA and,
Well, the reason why I wanted to mention that quickly is that the other compound that's always thrown into these testosterone supplements, and the one that I see people prescribing more than anything for the totally wrong reason, is DIM. Diindole methane. They claim that it can change the ratios from the 2 to the 16 based on research from a totally different compound, indole 3-carbinol. So they use research on indole 3-carbinol to show that it actually changes these pathways, and therefore DIM will do it as well. But the difference is indole 3-carbinol is converted into DIM in the process of changing those pathways. So DIM's the consequence at the end. It doesn't mean it's the thing that'll cause it. So they've done a lot of studies. They found interesting that a lot of people that are promoting DIM, and when we were saying, I think we did a podcast, Don't Be a Dimwit or something, I think we might have offended some people with that one as well. But they keep wanting to talk about the research and see if we're up to date. So I wanted to check the new research from 2020 that they've all been quoting from to say, aha, we were right and they were wrong, because it did show that it increased the 2 compared to the 16. A little bit. But the problem was nowhere near as much as it increased the 4. So the DIM, it did drop the 16, but it didn't increase the 2. It actually increased the 4. And the 4 is the one that is associated with breast cancers and everything. So then I went and had further research into it again, just to double check DIM in regards to other functions, because the net result when you use DIM is you annihilate your androgens and increase estrogen. It is sold in the market as an anti-estrogen to build up the ratios between testosterone and estrogen, but it has the exact opposite effect. I've got a paper somewhere amongst this pile saying that DIM is the most potent natural anti-androgen ever. It actually blocks androgens.
Receptors.
It stimulates the aromatase, so it increases estrogen. It actually works as a phytoestrogen, so it actually has an estrogen receptor effect. And the only effect that its claim to fame around estrogen is its ability to manipulate the cytochrome P450 pathways in the liver, which it doesn't do the way we want anyway, because it just increases the bloody 4.
And if it binds to the androgen receptors, as you say, well, that will also then have a consequence for things like dopamine, right? Because testosterone, once it binds to androgen receptors in the brain, that's when you release dopamine, and dopamine is the feel-good reward system, makes us feel great. So, if you have something like DIM potentially, binding or blocking those androgen receptors, that could have impacts on mood, libido.
I'll tell you something crazy about DIM, because I know some really cool people that love it, and they tell me that it just works so well, and they'll argue with me, why does it work so well? And I said, tell me what it works so well on. Like, tell me why you believe it's show me your blood levels, show me the Dutch test, show me the ratios changing in the urine, and I'll be genuinely impressed. And I said, and also show me it's the only thing you're doing to be scientifically valid. However, when I question these people, there's never any testing. And usually it's relating to symptoms that they've seen in women, that they believed to be estrogen dominance, that was removed, but was actually in actual fact an androgen dominance, and they corrected the woman's androgen excess, which we're going to talk about in the next part of the podcast, using DIM, and then assumed that that was fixing estrogen dominance in women by fixing their menstrual cycle, but in fact it was fixing their androgen issues associated with their insulin resistance syndromes and blah, 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 and then by default was fixing negative feedback on estrogen. nothing to do with the pathway they believed. And this is a problem with confirmation bias when you're not doing proper scientific validity. And if you totally disregard what the science states that stuff does because you've observed something differently, it's just weird.
Correct, and this is where we fall in a rabbit hole of like the stimulants like the D-aspartic acid, as you said.
Yeah.
It stimulates the CYP pathways as well.
Yeah.
So that's why, and what we fell for was in animals which have different CYP pathways slightly, their testosterone increases.
Yeah.
It's good for
But
animals.
over what time period, Steve? Because even in the humans, it increased in the first week.
Yep.
But then it just tanked after that. But they only want to talk about that first week.
Yeah.
And in the same papers that they talk about the testosterone surge that they reference, has that information about aromatase and significantly increased estrogen with the net effect being low test.
Yep, the longest study they did was after 28 days, D-aspartic supplementation had no effect on muscle strength, body mass, serum hormones, total testosterone, free testosterone, LH, GnH, and estradiol. It just has no effect after a long period of time. In animals, though, where they give them shorter effects, it actually helps their testosterone. But that's where we fell for it because the rats lied to us. They said, oh, no, this will boost your testosterone when you give it to rats. And then we took it, and it doesn't do anything.
Fuck, he's talking to rats.
Well, you're talking to rats by 23 animal studies.
So
They lied.
I'm thinking he's some sort of a genius.
we gave these.
Doolittle.
We gave these.
Ratatouille.
We gave rats D-aspartic acid, and their testosterone went up. So they said, "Well, it must work on us," and it doesn't.
Yeah.
They lied.
Well, this paper
The rats
here,
lied.
and I printed it off accidentally with great big writing. So.
Hey,
Oh, that's great.
you
I
like
can
that?
read that.
That's a massive title.
D-aspartic acid supplementation combined with 28 days of heavy resistance training has no effect on body composition, muscle strength, serum hormones associated with the hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis and resistance-trained men. If I'd known I had to read it, I would have picked a shorter titled paper.
like
And
the
it's
one
written
I-
by Darren S. Willoughby and Brian Luthart. I don't know how to say that name, but it kind of looks like Luthart. Look, how would you say that?
Oh, Leotolds.
You would know how to say that, wouldn't you?
Well, it's
You and your
more-
Dutch tests.
But it's incredible because we've got great supplements like zinc that we sort of talked a bit about before and how important that is. And men have a higher requirement of zinc, don't they, mate? They're 15 to 10.
So we were
Yeah.
talking before that testosterone goes into the Leydig cells and we get the follicle stimulating hormone makes sperm. Luteinizing hormone is zinc dependent, testosterone zinc dependent, sperm is zinc dependent.
Yep.
Yeah. And how much do men lose with ejaculation?
You can talk about that.
Pardon?
With
Your voice was
ejaculation.
quivering in, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Would you like to ask that again while we make eye
Just a bit
contact?
clearer.
I don't think I'm going to make eye contact. How much zinc do men lose during ejaculation?
You couldn't even open your eyes then. Approximately 5 milligrams. What's the
Yep.
difference in the RDI between men and women?
I don't know.
5 milligrams.
5 milligrams.
milligrams.
I wonder why.
They
But
assume
that's assuming that ejaculation only occurs once a day.
only occurs once a day.
Well, we're talking about an average as well.
I'm
but-
married. Once a month.
No, it's also no, Elisma. It's also assuming that it's once a day that 5 milligrams doesn't get donated to the other. So you can imagine
that's
5
true.
milligrams because
I did not
if there
think
was
about
one that
that.
goes on the floor, that's 5 milligrams lost.
So you're transferring the 5 milligrams to the other person, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but that's obviously, but then on average, it might
That's
be
another
once
way
a
of doing
day
the
that
zinc
you've lost your 5.
requirements.
Exactly. But basically, zinc is extremely important. I'm going to look at you. No, I don't look at anyone here. Look at the camera. Zinc is extremely important for sperm production. There is approximately 5 milligrams of zinc lost in every ejaculation if you choose to lose it. But, so 5 milligrams of zinc is in every ejaculation. When you're looking at fertility, when you're looking at getting the nuts back and full after doing gear, when you're looking at getting this whole pathway working, make sure you're not zinc deficient. And there's many reasons for zinc deficiency, including toxic exposure to the same toxins that have been associated with all these problems. So there's no, that's enough.
Okay.
That's about to start talking about the difference again, and that's where everything gets really weird.
So let's say we grow old like me and our testosterone levels start to decline. We get symptoms, and one of them, for example, is bad memory. In fact, Alzheimer's is
right.
associated with low levels of testosterone. So it's kind of important.
Long-term memory or short-term memory? What is
Long-term.
it? So they lose their long-term memory, but good
Yep.
short-term.
The lower the testosterone,
Yeah.
the more chance you've got of developing Alzheimer's disease, which is one reason why women get more Alzheimer's disease than men.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So testosterone detoxifies beta amyloid plaques from the brain.
Yeah,
So it
right.
has a revert, because they did a study once where they injected men with testosterone and their beta amyloid plaque levels dropped in their brain.
Because we know all these hormones have an effect on the immune profile. Most hormones, to a certain degree, are anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And it's funny, as our hormones drop as we age, you'll see cholesterol comes up. We know all aspects of aging are inflammatory.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
as the hormones drop, the inflammation just increases.
Yep.
But it gets that vicious cycle where the inflammation and this increased stress response is actually driving the nervous system and shutting down. Because, I mean, if we were to simplify things even further, we've got your survival stress nervous system that's hurry, worry, money, gives you everything you need to work and stress and punch and run and all that sort of stuff. And then the other nervous system that does the rest, the digestion, also does all your hormones, your detox, your sleep, recovery and reproduction. You know, so it's really important to get that balance through. So in my opinion, the first thing anyone should do is make sure their zinc is adequate, make sure they're sleeping well, have a good look at your lifestyle, and make sure those things are going before you start using things that might prime the luteinizing hormone and then maximize the testosterone release. The next thing we really have to do is have a good understanding of the individual and how likely, what their pathways are like for aromatase and 5-alpha reductase, because there's no point creating a big testosterone surge if those pathways have been upregulated and their body's converting that testosterone straight through to estrogen and dihydro. And this is the problem when the people were using the D-aspartic acids in the study, is it was driving those enzymes faster than it was driving the testosterone.
Yeah.
They were increasing estrogen and dihydro significantly, and the testosterone was not affected because it was just driving the process. So when you do it, so the aromatase, the things that work on aromatase, there's heaps, but there's like nettles, there's fenugreeks, a lot of those, and a lot of those antioxidants. Of course, we've got to make sure we've got the zincs. There's other aromatase inducers, which we'll talk about in a sec. But typically, if you've got inflammation and you've got a lot of stress and you're using stimulants like the D-aspartic acid, the aromatase is going to be driving really fast. Also understand that at any moment when you do supra-physiological doses of testosterone, like you're outside the natural range, the body's going to want to convert it. It's going to just want to create that balance because ratios of hormones are more important than the actual amounts.
Absolutely.
So they're trying to create that balance. So there's absolutely no point going through doing a big campaign to increase your testosterone if you just so happen to have a lot of fat with a lot of aromatase activity, because their body's going to convert a lot of that to estrogen. Common problem with people that might take steroids or something like that to try to get their body into shape, but they've already got the love handles, they've already got a little bit of extra fat on their chest, they've got a lot of aromatase going on. So that testosterone converts to estrogen, and then while their coach and their best mate, he gets shredded and all that sort of stuff, this poor bastard goes bald and gets boobs, you know, from the same chemical. So you just got to understand those pathways and try to create a bit of a biochemical trap to create the hormonal profile you want. So the aromatase is the conversion to estrogen. 5-alpha reductase is the dihydrotestosterone. So the stuff on the market, stuff they usually sell for prostates and acne and hair loss. And, you know, so we're looking at, you know, the saw palmettos, again, the fenugreek, the nettles, they all work in those sort of areas as well. What other, and zinc and selenium, again, make sure you're not deficient in them. What other tricks do you guys have for those? Was there anything in particular that you had for 5-alpha reductase? Considering they're all different types.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, from my perspective, you know, reduce oxidative stress, because oxidative stress, which is kind of like a blanket term for inflammation, infections, toxins, you know, anything that kind of like stresses the body can drive that 5-alpha reductase, and that includes like mental stress as well.
Yeah.
And something I wanted to kind of point out, because you did talk about, you know, like stress responses in the sympathetic nervous system, is it's important to understand that, because so many people have weird cortisol patterns, right? Like too much cortisol at night, too little during the day. And we have to understand that, you know, with cortisol, it's produced with that stress response, but it's also produced as an anti-inflammatory. So now think of people, for instance, who overtrain and they don't have enough anti-inflammatory foods in their diet, like the turmerics and the omega-3s and things like that. If you're constantly overtraining, you don't have enough anti-inflammatories in your diet, your body will pump out cortisol to try and reduce that inflammation. Or it'll pump out cortisol when you're, stressed and work too much and not sleep enough. And that cortisol uses the same building blocks as the testosterone.
Yeah.
It comes from cholesterol.
Yeah.
So that means all that cholesterol gets diverted down to cortisol, which also makes you fat because it breaks down your muscle, right? It puts your body into gluconeogenesis, breaks down your muscle. So it's a double-edged, a lot of those kinds of things we have to kind of take into account. It's not always just looking at testosterone, but it's like, well, maybe nothing's even going to testosterone because it's all going down the sympathetic nervous
getting
system.
into that perimenopause or the andropause phase, because what's happening as we age, Steve, you would have done this probably 100 years ago.
Probably, yeah. I'm living the process of aging as we speak.
What normally happens is that the nuts kind of slow right down and do bugger all. Just hang there, don't they, Steve? When
That's it, yeah. Just
and then like craisins. I love craisins now. I don't know why I started thinking about it. Anyway, what was I talking about?
Nuts. You were talking about testicles.
As you age.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So your nuts, they shrivel up and do bugger all. And your adrenals have got to pick up. So your adrenals have got to make all your androgen load. And your adrenals got to decide, am I going to make cortisol to deal with life-threatening stress that might kill me today? Or am I going to do DHEA and pregnenolones and testosterone and all that sort of stuff for all my hormones for maintenance, repair, look after my bones and my muscles so I can live longer? It's like, well, if you're not going to survive the day, don't worry about living longer, So your body's resources go towards the cortisol. But again, I just want to mention that one thing that blokes have to understand, because blokes, it got to take sometimes for them to acknowledge the stress or the depressions or the anxieties or something like that. They've got to be almost broken. But I want you to know that that's mental power. So a lot of blokes are using mental power and commitment and dedication and the stuff that they were taught on what it means to be a real man. And they use this sort of stuff to try to block out everything and just go. And it's not until they totally crumble that they go, yeah, actually, I'm stressed. I need people to understand that that's not what stress is. That's like depression or exhaustion. What I'm talking about is stress. Sometimes it's just the traps won't let go. Sometimes it's just posture. You've got to understand that your body can't afford to wait to see what the stress is before it reacts. Someone, it might be 5G radiation. Even though you don't feel anxious with it, you might be manifesting a stress response in your body. That might be perspiration or bad posture, like a defensive posture. So it's really important to understand that low-grade inflammation, allergies, intolerances, just having immune symptoms. So the funny thing is any of these symptoms manifest a stress response in the body. Whether your brain is mentally coping with it, no problems, or even acknowledges it, that's irrelevant. So we've got to understand that the body is all holistic. We'll have manifest different symptoms in different areas. We have a good understanding that if you are sore, you are inflamed, you've got oxidative stress, you're doing immune challenges and all that sort of stuff, then you have stress within your body, and your body is not waiting to see if that's a lion attacking you or whatever, or if that's one of those other factors. And so the whole time it's sitting there going, this is chronic, this is loitering, potentially you're being stalked by something. Don't reproduce. Don't stop and shag. So therefore you don't need that testosterone. Don't worry about rebuilding muscles that you've broken at fleeing today. Don't worry about improving bone density and clearing out your arteries and all that sort of stuff. None of that is important when your body thinks it's in stress. And so little low-grade chronic stress, low-grade inflammation, that's why that kills people. The low-grade inflammation and oxidative stress that comes with that, without that body just having that recovery time, it just creates a chronic stress that eventually depletes your anti-inflammatory hormones and that are going to be doing all the regeneration and repair. So all that stuff needs to be managed. Otherwise, you're just trying to push shit uphill. You're trying to force hormones to surge against adversity. But like I said, it could be that frozen shoulder could be that thing. And that frozen shoulder could be coming from the inflammation of the wrong food you're eating. It's not as simple as you need this herb. I love things like tribulus. Tribulus I really like because tribulus terrestris has got these wicked functions where it can help with the luteinizing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone. It can help with the health of all of these systems, but it also has that ability to, as an adaptogenic property, to reduce how much stress you're feeling within the body. And you'll find most herbs, the tribulus, the fenugreeks, the nettles, the Korean ginsengs, the shilajits, they all have these anti-inflammatory antioxidant. They all are famous for their ability to work with toxins and heavy metals. They're all like detoxifiers and it's synergy, and you'll see these things happening all the time. And that's why it's so cool to do the natural stuff. And that's why I get really weird about compounds like the diaspartic acids and the DIM that are used more like a drug, but not so. They're not understood as well, and we're still learning about them, and people refuse to acknowledge it. That DIM, I mean, I tell you what, there's a paper here I just spotted again. It just reminded me that they did the DIM. No, they had this one here. They don't have a lot of people use the DIM when they're on gear to stop the estrogen things.
Oh, really?
But they'll also use DIM when they're coming off the steroids and that to get their nuts back. But this one here is saying that it totally screws it all. What is it here? It leads to apoptosis in the testes. That's self-destructive.
Apoptosis.
That's how much your testicles don't like it. They want to self-destruct to get away from it. And decreases sperm quality, increases estrogen, and drops testosterone, and it screws around with your androgen receptors. It just screws everything. It just actually stops you making sperm. So that whole thing with their net and to get their hormones and their nuts back, it's all about how full their nuts fill up with sperm. That's how they're measuring it. This thing blocks it.
Blocks it all.
And they're using it with it and then saying, not sure what's going wrong.
It's all depressing, but something else is very depressing.
Oh, it's not all depressing. Steve, we're supposed to be inspiring people.
Well, I'm going to bring a bit of a downer here because low testosterone is associated with depression in men.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is correct because all that stress does, and it all drops testosterone, as you said, the correct part.
It's a big vicious cycle.
It is.
Yeah.
And you imagine Joe Sixpack going to the doctor, I'm feeling depressed. Oh, here's some, not testosterone boosters. Here's some Prozac.
Let's talk about these hormones in the brain for a sec, because this is important for people to understand. Low testosterone. So testosterone, what it does is it enhances the release of catecholamines, dopamine, but it also improves the efficiency. So these things have a quick effect, so you can have a stress response and then let it go. As opposed to estrogen, they can inhibit the negative feedback. So what happens with estrogen, you get an amplified stress response and you get harder to switch it off. It actually interferes with cortisol negative feedback on that nervous system. You can't switch off your stress. So a man that has been dominant with testosterone most of his life over estrogen, to have his testosterone drop and that estrogen stay the same or maybe even increase if his body fat's gone up and all that sort of stuff, the switch between the brain and the inability to stop thinking, that inability to just let go. So with a man, with the testosterone, it will allow for an efficient and fast and sometimes aggressive stress response, but then it stops. And the dopamine, as you know, does reward pride, self-esteem. It's like I kick that stress's ass.
Motivation.
Nailed it.
Actually.
Where the women with the estrogen-dominant brain would actually have that same stress trigger, would release more stress chemicals related, but the big problem is they can't switch the bloody stuff off after. So that mental chatter, they can't switch that off. So instead of where the blokes might get pride, self-esteem, reward for surviving a challenge, the women are left with the chemicals going, did I do it right? I should have done it differently. Tomorrow I probably got to do this again. Yeah. So those sort of chemicals in the brain will manifest with those sort of doubts and fears, as opposed to the bloke going, I don't know, it's gone now. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so that quick switch is massive. Now then, if you look at the data on dihydrotestosterone and what that does to the brain, that's your roid rage, road rage, aggression, psychotic behaviour. So when they say testosterone enhances your stress response and makes it more efficient, testosterone doesn't make you psycho, and it doesn't make you a mongrel, and it doesn't make you an aggressive grub. But that's dihydrotestosterone, and that damage that can do to the brain can be irreversible. And so that massive surges of dihydrotestosterone as people enhance their testosterone, then it converts through. That combination of aggression from dihydro, if they also have an abundance of estrogen, they also can't let it go. So there's this anger, this aggression that's unreasonable and to start with, but also they can't stop thinking about it. So it's just this ongoing, as opposed to clearing those things away and supporting the testosterone that will give confidence, pride, self-esteem, reward, where she'll be right, mate, nailed it, fixed it. So that massive difference when we look at male depression. And if you combine those brain chemistry stuff with what we talked about within the body, that the stress in their body that could be creating these problems may be as simple as bad posture, sitting too long at work, having to deal with phone calls and shit all the time, So That's really important for blokes to understand. And then that's why it's so important to get this lifestyle shit sorted first. Make sure you don't. And you'll see the same patterns. How many papers do you see with zinc deficiency associated with anxiety, depressions as well?
Everywhere.
All the neurological functions. So it's all linked. So you don't treat diseases and you don't treat hormones. You treat people and get them into their best. And then once they're at that stable state, everything's in the normal physiology, like we do with our athletes, we can then really screw around with shit to get that elite level, to get up to that top or outside of normal physiology to achieve amazing things. But it's all got to be totally structured specifically for the individual.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. The way I view hormonal issues, in this case, let's say low testosterone, it's secondary. So you don't treat it as a primary condition and just give someone necessarily testosterone or whatever. You try and figure out what your body's doing with it or not doing with it.
Yep.
And
especially when you see the other stuff high. Like, especially if you're seeing that they can do cortisol, they've got dihydro, they've got issue. You say you don't need to increase your hormone load.
Yep.
Like these people haven't got their nuts like squashed or anything. I mean, that's a bit weird thing to say, but it's not that we have to rebuild this one thing. It's like if those cholesterol is going into making these other hormones, then we know they have the capacity to have that hormonal load. It's just the ratios and the priorities within the body is screwed up.
Yeah.
And so that's where we need to just go through and go, no, we change the priorities. All those resources that are going into cortisol right now, we need to take it away from that and put it into testosterone.
Testosterone,
And sometimes it's as simple as that when you're treating a person.
Yeah.
When we're trying to talk to everyone, it's a bit bloody hard to summarise all the possible scenarios, and then the end result is some people think, shit, I've got to do this, and this. But what we're hoping is that people are going to pick out their strengths and weaknesses and kind of manage that first.
And another simple thing we know from papers like this one, a meta-analysis showing that simple low vitamin D status is associated with low testosterone in a meta-analysis.
Yeah, so we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Vitamin D and testosterone are made from the same thing. What would be really interesting to see if that is also associated with high levels of cholesterol that's backlogged, or low levels of cholesterol because they're on Lipitor. Statins, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got that other paper somewhere in amongst this pile. I print these papers out more like props, just to show people I did some work. Where's yours, Elisma?
She's got the one on semen.
I've got one here.
Yeah. Hey, I've just decided I got a new laugh. Did you hear that?
It's like the evil mad laugh.
That's a good one. It's quite amazing because
did you like that laugh?
I love the laugh. I love the laugh. Amazing, it's more sinister. It's interesting because we've talked about testosterone as like in the early 2000s, all guys in America particularly were getting testosterone shots because you know what? It drove dopamine up in their brain. They felt fantastic. And now it's waned because people are going, well, why? It's waned. It's not as popular as it was because people are going, well, why do I need testosterone? Why can't I make my own? And now it's becoming less popular, even though the injection will make you feel great. There's no question about that. I've had it. It's amazing,
Really?
Sustanon many years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you feel fantastic.
Shows your head.
But remember, it's dihydrotestosterone causing this baldness. And so testosterone...
No, I thought it was a thumb. The thumbprint.
I'm married. But this whole testosterone thing is quite amazing because it's so valuable for men. And the quick answer is you get a shot from the doc or a cream or whatever you want to get or a pellet, which mainly for women. We'll talk about pellets later. But it's actually quite incredible because low testosterone is also associated with things like migraines.
Yeah, wow.
So
but then we know that estrogen excess is associated with migraines.
Yeah.
So again, ratios, hey?
Ratios. And so, what they found was people with chronic migraines have super low levels of testosterone.
But is that the stress? See, this is the whole thing. With everything I read, it's just like, well, which comes first? No, in this instance, which comes first? So let's talk about something
I can answer
else.
that because in our next podcast next week, we're going to talk about the most effective treatment.
We do have to do it now.
No, well, I'll give you a prelude to it. I'll give you a teaser, what we call. So the most effective migraine treatment for women is actually testosterone.
Fuck off.
92,
really? Steve?
Yes, 92% effective rate. So it's it's more effective than painkillers, opioids, everything. And that's for next week.
Wow.
Because most of the triptans, the drugs for migraines, based on serotonin receptors, and they boost serotonin like 1B, that receptor, to vasoconstrict to get rid of the calcitonin gene-related peptide. But testosterone has a more powerful effect.
Does it send the blood somewhere else?
Yeah.
Where?
It's vasoconstrictive in the brain.
And vasodilation where, Steve?
It doesn't do that. Actually, if you...
So hang on, let's talk about that then.
All right.
Does testosterone give you wood?
Yes.
Don't look at me like that,
it's
Stephen.
through-
Say it
it
like
does.
that. No, it wasn't.
It
That
does.
wasn't. I asked
It
that
does.
wrong.
It's
Not
through
you.
the nitric
Wood.
oxide synthase system, I believe. I think
that's right.
testosterone stimulates nitric oxide release.
So why wouldn't that increase the blood flow to the head and like? Oh, so chronic migraines are often different to those acute migraines. So chronic migraines is often associated with inadequate blood flow to the brain,
And
where the body then has to respond with vasodilation.
yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And
Thanks,
it's to do
Steve.
with a hormone called calcitonin gene-related peptide. We won't talk about that
Oh, I
today.
call it Casabaja.
Yeah, Casabaja. So there's new drugs coming out where they inject you with an antibody to that, and that's reducing migraines as well. So that's the key chemical for migraines. But testosterone has a wonderful regulatory effect on the blood vessels. And that's why, as you get older, a lot of older men and women get heart attacks because their testosterone drops and they don't produce the nitric oxide, so they don't get the vasodilation, and they don't get wood,
Yeah.
but they don't get blood flow to their heart either.
What do you mean
And
wood?
what do I mean by wood? Vasodilation in certain 1% areas of the male anatomy.
Erections. You're allowed to say
I can say erection? Oh, good.
Yeah.
So it has an amazing response in the brain, testosterone. So it gives you that, it treats
What's
prevention.
libido? Can you explain a little bit about libido with testosterone? Because I know it's a little bit more. We always assume it's just testosterone, but there's a definite switch of testosterone to estrogen. There's a link with aromatase in the
Yes,
brain, isn't there?
absolutely
Tell
is.
us, Steve. You know a lot about this.
Well,
it's weird.
It's actually, if I want to be technical, when I used to do my exams, I'd say what hormone is responsible for libido in men?
Yeah.
And people say testosterone,
Yeah.
and it's partially correct, but it's actually estradiol because it has to be aromatized within the glial cells in the brain to
Yeah, crazy,
activate
huh?
those. Yeah, it's just a little final switch there.
Yeah.
But, technically it's estradiol that increases libido. And that's why a lot of obese men with low testosterone still have a libido.
Yeah.
But-
Because they've got lots of estradiol
Yeah.
Yeah,
floating
wow.
around. So, it's quite a scenario where you can still have loads of estradiol floating around and you still have a high libido.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
also that thing of, like a lot of men, they still have the high libido, but they just can't get the erection
That's
kind of
correct
thing,
too.
right?
But what about the test? Hang on. You said testosterone has to be aromatized in the glial cells in the brain.
The brain, yeah.
What about, does it have to be testosterone delivered to the brain and then converted, or would an estrogen dominance affecting a part of the brain still do libido?
Absolutely still has libido. And
So
that's
it's
why
just-
women still have libidos because
Yeah.
they've got stuff all testosterone.
Yeah, but when women lose their libido, typically we would do stuff looking at testosterone mainly.
Sure.
But the actual hormone that does libido is the estrogen. So again, ratios.
And
It's probably
to be,
again you
to
need-
be very,
yeah.
very specific, it's estradiol E2.
Yeah, and that
the one.
comes from testosterone via aromatization.
Aromatase.
Aromatization.
And then estradiol can go to E3 and E1.
Yeah.
So
Wow,
it's
man.
very interesting.
is.
The brain chemistry. I mean, look, we've talked about testosterone and depression, Alzheimer's. We talked about with migraine. So we think of testosterone as biceps, and muscles and that sort of thing.
yeah.
But the effects in the brain and the wellness
How does
feeling
it?
for
So
me.
when we're talking about the anabolic properties, I mean mainly as an anti-inflammatory and all those sorts of things, it reduces the amount of damage you get done.
Yep.
Significantantly improves your recovery.
Is what it
reduces pain and enhances. It's required for certain amounts of muscle protein synthesis and everything. The funny thing is, it's probably, from what I know of hormones, it's actually the third most anabolic or fourth most anabolic of hormone
there's
that
quite
I
a few
know
above
of.
it.
Because there's insulin is more anabolic, estrogen is more anabolic than testosterone. Not many people know that, and oxytocin is even more anabolic
That's right.
again.
That's incredible.
So that's freaky to think that testosterone is this fame just for that. It's just going to build muscles and burn fat. It's just so much more than that. It's so other factors that people need to understand. And interesting things like trenbolone, for example, was one of the most, apparently the most potent androgenic anabolic steroid. They've recently discovered it has 50-fold the effect on oxytocin.
Yeah.
And that most of its
there you
effects are
go.
actually coming through oxytocin, which again fits in with libido, shag, and rebuild a new body at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, testosterone for men, that from the top of the head to the toes, really, it's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
from
Especially those guys
vasodilation.
that have lost their hair off the top of their head. We
What are you
really need to
saying?
get those
Yeah,
hormones right.
yeah.
Because that's the dihydrotestosterone.
It is.
Yeah.
And the male pattern baldness is to do with the DHT, which, as you said, has that aggressive nature in the brain and that sort of
Yep.
thing. So you have too much of it in the wrong area.
Yep.
It's associated with stimulating the fat cells
Yep.
in the skin to make more acne. So it's an incredibly important hormone, and it's just a metabolite of testosterone, and you need it. You don't need too much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't want to.
It's more important really in the younger years where
Yeah.
sexual differentiation takes place with boys and things like that. But not
you choose
later
to.
on. If you choose to.
So I'm just going to go quick summary because then we'll probably give Brooke a bit of a break. She's freaking out right now. She needs to go toss and buy a break. I don't know what it is. We'll do another podcast in a sec. But the summary so far is testosterone. We know it's really important for building a healthy body, right? And needs to be in ratios with all the other hormones that are all equally important with each other, right?
Exactly.
If you don't have enough testosterone, you typically get fatigued. You can very common to have anemia. You really struggle to get proper development in muscle and bone. Lack motivation, lack drive, and all that sort of stuff. More predisposed to stress and worry, and especially anxieties and that. Big link with the suicidal rates in teenage boys in Australia with estrogen and dihydro over natural levels of testosterone, and that's a massive link with that dark cloud that's plaguing our men in our society and our young men in particular, especially last year because they're all messed up with all their lifestyle being changed. Stats from that are horrendous. It's really upsetting me. We have to do more on that. Testosterone excess typically manifests with such things as acne, male pattern baldness, prostate problems, hirsutism, typically weird place. You lose the hair on the top of your head and gain it everywhere else. It's like if someone's grabbed it on your back and ripped it and it's just going so it's like I saw a cartoon of that one, so I thought I never forgot that. Like that other weird quote. Now, what else?
Well, as we age, men age, we lose our testosterone ability to
When's
make
it.
it.
Peak? 20s? Mid-20s?
Yeah, 20. Actually, 18 to 19 it peaks,
True.
and after that, it's all downhill.
Holy shit.
And I'm 52
Feels
in
that way,
about 3
doesn't it?
weeks. So,
Really?
yeah, I know.
All
It's terrible. Actually, someone else having a birthday coming up soon.
Who's that?
You
Me?
are.
Yes. Try to forget about that. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
I'll be 45.
I know. It's
there you go.
The fittest and best I'll ever be at 45. You should have seen 35. Fuck, that was a bad time.
Oh.
Anyway, 27 was my favourite age.
27?
I don't know why.
That's very specific.
I know.
That's very
I can't remember. I think that was the year I was driving around Australia.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, let's do something else. What do we do? Say goodbye to the people.
Well, what we can talk about in our next episode is going to be about the ladies. And we're going to be talking about the good, the bad.
We just fucking offended the ones that aren't ladies, that are ladies.
We're going to be talking about the owners of the uteruses after the next and ovaries. Yeah,
regardless of menstrual activity or cycle.
They may not have
testosterone in innies.
They may have lost it in hysterectomy.
Yeah,
so
whatever. So we're going to talk about the others.
The others.
The testosterone in other people that we haven't mentioned thus far.
Correct. That's exactly probably correct to say it. Huh. So I hope you've enjoyed men and testosterone. Next week, it's women and testosterone.
Don't say that, Steve.
Oh,
it's just testosterone in the other people that we haven't mentioned thus far.
It's going to be testosterone in the other people that we haven't that identify as someone other than what we've just talked about. There you go. That's pretty concise, isn't it, Brooklyn? All right. Next week, women and testosterone.
And then we'll come back
women
and
testosterone.